The Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants is outside my apartment window. And they're talking really loudly.
I can actually hear them a little bit.
Yep, they saw me and immediately moved. Fucking put on your fucking mask. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Watch No Evil. This is Zach.
And this is Matt.
And today we're going to be reviewing the 1985 horror comedy film RE-ANIMATOR, which is based on a serial novelette called Herbert West RE-ANIMATOR that was first written by H.P. Lovecraft in 1922. This is, of course, a modern adaptation that follows Herbert West, a sort of Victor Frankenstein-esque mad scientist in the pursuit of creating a serum that would grant new life or bring back to life the dead, as he meets Dan Kane, a young but unassuming doctor at a university called Miskatonic University in Arkham, Massachusetts. Together, they go on a series of comedic yet gory and horrifying adventures in which they reanimate deceased patients of the hospital, including the father of Dan's fiancée, Megan, the dean of the university, and Dr. Carl Hill, a rival professor who is trying to steal Herbert West's research into rebirth. So I think that this is an interesting film, Zach, and I think that now is a good time to talk to you about my shades of undeath theory, okay? So we mentioned when we started watching this movie that the depictions of these reanimated dead people, and they are dead when they receive the reanimation serum, they have essentially like their primal motivations, so anger, fear. We don't ever see them like hunger for anything, so they're not really a zombie. They're not like looking to feast on human flesh, but rather it's almost as if part of the human brain is brought back, but not all of the cognitive materials that typically go along with a human brain. And so my theory of the shades of undeath revolves around this idea that in filmmaking, the quality of undeathness is proportionally related to how evil all of the characters in the film are. So for example, think about Dracula. Dracula, a vampire, is typically considered undead, right?
Yes.
But is he really wicked? Is he evil?
I don't think he's evil. He's just subsisting off of
it's about
the lives
survival.
of other people, and it's all about survival.
And it is only about survival. So in terms of sheer malice and wickedness, he's not really that wicked. I think that of all of the types of undeath that is featured in film, he is the least undead of the undead. And in fact, he's more like a plant than he is a dead person. He needs only the barest nutrients to survive, much like trees need water and soil with roots in it. He just gets his materials elsewhere, and also has a brain and is capable of thought. But the pulmonary system doesn't necessarily work. And so with Dracula, the quality of undeath is not that undead. And in RE-ANIMATOR, the wickedness that we see in the movie, the malice, the evil, is represented more in Dr. Carl Hill and kind of a little bit in Herbert West, but a little less evil and a little bit more mad. And so, because Carl Hill is the one that's truly evil, the reanimated corpses in this movie are subsequently not as evil and not as undead. They are in fact less undead than the prototypical zombie. Even in normal zombie movies, there's still something to be said about the people around them that would typically be the thing that considers them undead. They are obviously undead, but there's somehow like representative of humanity or of like capability of thought there. And then you have the most undead, which is skeletons. And I think that they're always bad. And that's it.
Okay.
It's interesting though, I was going through like past movies that we had because there's zombies of different qualities, right? So there's the demonic zombie, which is, new life, through some sort of demonic possession or demonic means.
Like Evil Dead.
Yeah, like Evil Dead, there's the magical undeath, which is like necromancy, which usually relates to like skeletons and bullshit.
Which is also kind of like Evil Dead, but
Also kinda
it's
like
like a
Evil
gray
Dead.
area for that one.
You know, necromancers, they're usually fucking with skeletons. Then there's the historiological undead, which is things like Dracula or historical figures that are being represented on film. There's the scientific undead, which is undead that is brought back to life by some sort of mad scientist.
Like this one.
In those, the undead is typically less bad, less evil. And then there's the pathogenic undead, which are pretty bad, but not the worst.
I feel like the pathogenic undead, that's kind of like your mindless kind of zombie that you see. You know, think like Zombieland or, you know, even like Night of the Living Dead and Cargo, which we've done an episode on. I do kind of like this idea, although I feel like when you apply it to Evil Dead in particular, it gets kind of hairy. That's one where like, but some of those characters, they just turned into these zombie-like creatures without even dying.
But that's the thing. Are they even really dead?
Zombies. Are they undead?
Are they undead? Because undead obviously implies death and then rebirth. But in that case, Evil Dead, it felt more like it was possession, which is demonic in nature, which I think removes the sort of zombie qualification that we give to it. The only thing being brought back to life is the corpse, and in that, the corpse is being animated by a demon rather than the corpse being reanimated.
Reanimated of its own workings.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I gotcha. All right, so we can kind of eliminate that one as a actual true undead.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess it somewhat makes sense. I kind of agree with your shades of undead then, if we apply those rules to it. And so would you then classify the reanimated dead in this movie as, would you say that they're zombies?
That's the thing. I don't necessarily think that they're zombies. I don't think that qualification...
I think of the pathogenic...
Yeah, I do too.
Undead. Whenever I think zombie, like it's a communicable disease almost.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, getting bit by a zombie, well, that kills you and therefore turns you into a zombie.
Yeah, and in this one, the scratching and the biting and whatnot doesn't do anything. There's no transfer of a virus or a viral infection. And in this case, they're more vegetative in the fact that they can still feel broad swaths of emotion, but they don't have the sort of cognitive thought behind it. The one exception to that is
Hill.
Yeah, who is for some reason evil.
I wonder if that's because like it's only the head that has the reagent going through it, so like maybe the brain is getting more of the reagent in it. But that doesn't really make sense because the Dr. Gruber at the beginning, he said he took too much and that's what made him die in that way.
Yeah,
that's a very gruesome way.
Part of it seems to be amount of serum injected. Some of it seems to be locationary. Because if you look at Dr. Halsey, it's really interesting that his serum was injected into the spine rather than into the brain. And so the motor function and the motor control of Halsey is arguably the best. He's got the sort of most faculty or control of his faculties. Like the motor control is there, but he doesn't have any of the sort of like emotional depth or cognitive depth.
I mean, he seems to have the most emotional depth because it's shown that he has this kind of like soft spot for his daughter still, Megan.
Right.
And he is really defensive of her. So like, he still has some emotional connections. Like, I don't know if he's really thinking of that consciously, but there's something in his mind instinctually or subconsciously that is making him want to defend her and to listen to her.
Which is then that becomes an argument of where does the instinct live? Where does an instinct inhabit a body?
I would say probably like the brain stem, like that's our center for the kind of the automatic functions of breathing and keeping your heart beating and all that kind of stuff. So I would say that instincts, that's kind of like what, the brain stems feed those other parts of the body in the same way that it would feed the brain the instinctual responses of what we see Dr. Halsey or Dead Halsey doing.
Right. So it would make sense that to have the injection into the base of the spine, where the brain meets the spine, would only activate the instinctive parts without activating the cognitive.
I don't know if they thought of this so scientifically. I think that... Do you really think they did?
Because I think H.P. Lovecraft did.
Yes, probably. I don't know if in H.P. Lovecraft's story, if Dr. Hill was decapitated and then reanimated in this way. Like, I was pretty on board with the mechanics of this film and the premise of this film until they decapitated him and put the reagent in his head and also his heart. Like, this reagent is supposed to reanimate a brain. They talk about brain death and overcoming brain death, and the brain stays alive 6 to 12 minutes after the body dies. And they keep repeating that, and Herbert West, he keeps like being like, no, that's not true. Me and Dr. Gruber have overcome that. And I think that's then why they're getting such good results out of Halsey and Hill when they reanimate them, because it's within that 6 to 12 minute period of time. I think that's just like a scientific fact that whoever looked up and was like, hey, we can use this in the writing of it.
Yeah.
I also want to quickly point out that the doctor in the beginning that West was supposedly studying under was named Hans Gruber.
Yep, of Zurich.
Yeah, which is that's the bad guy from Die Hard. Like, yeah. It's Alan Rickman.
Yeah.
I don't... What year was that? Because I heard it was 1988.
That's why I think it was probably Lovecraftian.
Or maybe it's just a really popular name for...
That's true.
German people.
Hans is not, like, wildly out there as far as names go. And that being said, the whole use of Herbert West being in Switzerland and giving life and killing Hans Gruber is sort of unnecessary.
I think it is unnecessary, but it is an interesting insight into his character, because then you kind of see him like he's usurped Dr. Gruber. I got the impression that he's like, I've learned all I can from this guy, so now I'm going to use him as a subject. Gives you some pause as to like, is this the bad guy of the movie?
Yeah.
Or is this the guy that the movie's about?
Did Herbert West kill Gruber? Or did he just reanimate him?
And Herbert West is like, he's not a likable character. He's very cold and aloof, and it's almost like he's Holmesian in a way, even though he is, I guess, the protagonist of this movie. It's like he's very driven and motivated, but it's all kind of like selfish.
Yeah.
But also like it's all in the name of science for him.
Right.
But it's also still very selfish because like he's endangering himself and others to do this research.
It's a little bit of a Richie Rich complex mixed with like a little bit of that Napoleonic complex, in that he is socially naive, but he is also precocious, right?
Yeah.
Like he is ready to overtake his superiors' research, and he's not afraid of sort of showing off to them. And he's portrayed as being short of stature, but he's big in personality, and his precociousness is making up for his smaller stature, on top of the fact that he is sort of socially inept. Nobody really likes to talk to him, and his social skill, in terms of how we see it portrayed in this movie, are essentially non-existent.
Yeah, which makes you kind of wonder why... Because I feel like usually when you get something like this where someone's trying to bring people back from the dead, there's like this backstory of, oh, they lost their loved one in whatever kind of accident and they wish that they could only bring them back, or some kind of sappy thing like that. And he doesn't have that. There's no backstory saying, oh, you know, his girlfriend died in this really horrific way and he was working on this like reanimation reagent at the same time and just couldn't get it right, and he couldn't bring her back, so now he wants to bring back everyone he can. It's just, no, he wants to eliminate death.
Yeah, who was Victor Frankenstein trying to save?
Well, Frankenstein's kind of different though, right? Because he's making a monster out of like the parts of other people.
He's usurping God.
Yeah, it's like he's creating life in a different kind of way.
It's more religious. It's anti-religious.
Yeah, he's not like reanimating one person. He's just creating life, basically. Yeah. Playing God.
The whole idea of Frankenstein being these like reanimated, stitched together body parts that like wants to learn language, and then because his creator and everyone rebukes him, he's just like, fine, I guess I'm gonna make y'all suffer. And really, he was not at fault for any of the issues in his life. But that's the whole, anti-enlightenment period that was a part of. And in this, they don't try to make Herbert West at all empathetic. Because I think in Frankenstein, they do try to make Victor Frankenstein a little empathetic. But then there's the whole thing of like, well, who's really the monster? Is it Frankenstein? Monster, or is it Victor Frankenstein? Yeah, it's like, who's really at fault? And in this movie, it's like, it's Herbert West. It's him. There's no equivocating here. It's him.
He is the lesser of the two evils. Like Hill, like they work so hard to make him the bad guy. They give him this whole obsessive personality, but he's not obsessive with his research like West is. He's obsessive with this co-ed. He's like really, really creepy, and he keeps a file folder of all the newspaper articles she's ever appeared in, and a lock of her hair, and God knows what else was in that, because that's all they showed.
It's the idea that if you're gonna make a multi-plotted story, you have to have the B plot be grounded in reality if the A plot is just out of left field. And so they make Hill like a legitimately bad person. Because they make him a legitimately bad person, they make the undead a little less undead and a little bit more like post-lobotomy. You talked about not being in on this movie. I love this movie and I think it's hilarious. But I always go out when at the end, all of a sudden, he can like telepathically control the other corpses.
I do agree. This movie's hilarious. I love the subtle humor of when Dan and West are in the morgue looking for like their first human subject, and they're looking at the causes of death. And they're going, nope, not this one. What's this? Oh, heart attack? Nope, not this one. That won't work. And, the burn victim. And then there is Dr. Hill, when he's dead and headless, he's sneaking into the morgue, but he's got like that model head on his body.
Oh yeah, I love that.
And he's just kind of like sidling along the wall. It's pretty funny. But that's what like it completely lost me is it's like a verbal cue. Mm-hmm. It's like he's told them ahead of time, like, I'm going to say this really epic line. It'll sound like super evil, and you're all going to spring up at the same time.
Yeah.
And it makes me wonder then, are these undead people supposed to be able to like communicate with each other non-verbally or like telepathically or something?
Well, that's the thing. He lobotomized them as well. And in that lobotomization, the same thing with Hill, it's like he's able to sort of assume control or make them more susceptible to control. It's almost like a form of hypnosis. It's dumb.
Shoddy psychology, I think.
Yeah, I agree, but at the same time, it's also, we have to remember, it's psychology from 1922. This is all they had.
Yeah, I think it's a good story. There's a lot of cheese and a lot of questions afterwards, and like if you remember, this is all for entertainment, then it's like, okay, it's fine. A little graphic at times, like unnecessarily graphic.
What? Name one time.
When they're removing the brain. They don't need to show that in that way.
I think, though, this is 1985, and part of that was a little bit of the gross out horror. So I agree they didn't need to do it, but at the time it was sort of in vogue.
No, I understand. I completely agree on that. It's just not for me. It's definitely not for me. Also, like, the beheading thing. Like, I can't get over it. You know what it reminds me of? The floating head doctor bit from Scrubs. Yeah, you know how, like, JD has those fantasies of, like, oh, I want to be, like, the floating head doctor. And so there's the floating head doctor that's just his head floating around, working with patients. And then you go, body, come. And the body's, like, of course, the complete dolt of the two because he doesn't have a brain.
Yeah.
And so he's, like, running into stuff and, like, catching himself on fire and all that. And that's... there are scenes from this with Hill's head and then his body being like separate entities that are in communication with each other. And there would be times when he's trying to get the body to do something and it kind of fumbles with something. And then you'll see Hill just kind of roll his eyes. And it is this shticky bit that they're doing with it. And it's just, I like the humor in this, but that just seems out of place to me.
Yeah. To think that this movie is technically a parody of Frankenstein. It was written to be a parody of Frankenstein.
You think that H.P. Lovecraft story was written to be a parody of Frankenstein?
Oh, I know it was.
Okay.
It was in his letters that have been published that it was supposed to be a parody of Frankenstein. I think that in a way, the dissectiveness of this movie is a little bit in homage to Frankenstein, because the most important thing about the Frankenstein corpse that is reanimated is the brain. They're trying to sort of create this like perfect being. And so in every adaptation of Frankenstein since as well, there is something revolving around the brain and how that brain can be sort of used to either give the monster that is being created free thought and free will, or use it for control. So in like the Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein movie, they're gonna replace the brain with Lou Costello's brain. And the whole reason is because the first brain that they had was a little too independent, a little too free. They wanted something they could control a little bit easier, right? And, you know, in other versions of this narrative, that's always the thing. And so I think a little bit of this dissective process is in homage to that. And also I think a little bit in line with the dissections that happen in the Dracula movies, which is parodied, I will say. This is a little bit grosser. It's still supposed to be, I think, a little bit comical with West, like, snapping his pencil. But if you've seen Dracula Dead and Loving It, the dissection scene in that is hilarious. And I think that they could have taken the approach here that they did in Dracula Dead and Loving It. Because I think that scene was supposed to be kind of funny.
No, it definitely was. And I think that it came off as funny. It's just that dissectionism of it. I think that you're right in thinking that this is a product of that late romanticism of like Frankenstein was written and like Dracula was written. There was this fascination with dissectionism and vivisectionism and
really exploring the body.
Yeah, human science.
In a way that is a direct affront to God.
It's so funny how we're still watching and telling and reading these stories that are all like kind of the same thing. This is like a combination of the Odyssey and the story of Icarus. You know, it's this guy having too much hubris and, you know, flying too close to the sun. And he tries to play God and it bites him anytime anyone's trying to reanimate anything. It's like they're trying to play God. They have a God complex, or they're just, you know, even look at like anime, Full Metal Alchemist. There are immediate consequences with that one.
Yeah, except for Frankenweenie, which I think is the best version.
Yeah, no, I'll give you that one. That's but the motivation there is different.
Right. And also it's a children's movie.
Anyways, going back to this movie, what I did like about it a lot though was the amount of foreshadowing in it. I thought they did so artistically and
constantly, yeah.
Yeah. Even the joke that the security guard for the morgue says, nobody wants in and there ain't nobody getting out. We know that people are getting out because this is called RE-ANIMATOR.
Right, yeah.
It's just almost like a nod to the audience, just being like, hey, we threw this in here for you.
Yeah, a little bit of fun irony, comedic irony.
Yeah. But my favorite one was when the women, in the very beginning, when Dan is doing compressions on that one woman to save her, and she's just so clearly gone. Then it ends with him trying to bring Megan back in the same way.
In the same bed?
Yeah, with the same, I assume is his attending there. And again, she tells him, like, no, she's gone. Even from the very beginning, it's like, it makes you feel like this deja vu when it happens at the end.
It's a little nice homage, I think, to the nature of the original novelette, Herbert West RE-ANIMATOR, because the way that those old novelettes were done is they would be essentially paying a writer $10, write a 2,000 word short story for us to publish in this newspaper. The only caveat is it has to end on a cliffhanger so that people will buy the next issue. And so in the original RE-ANIMATOR story, the short stories that were being churned out by H.P. Lovecraft, it ended on a cliffhanger. So I think that the decision of this one to do the same is an homage. And this is, of course, not a perfect retelling of the RE-ANIMATOR book, because because the Reanimator book took place during like a war.
Didn't you say that's like where they go with the second one?
Yeah, and it's more similar to the opening plot of the sequel. And it is a sort of direct pickup of where the first one ended, but I don't think it uses Megan in the same way. I'm pretty sure Megan just stays dead, if I remember correctly. And also the way that all of the timing stuff works out, and does method of death in this movie have something to do with how they come back? For example, Halsey was basically beaten up. Was it the blunt force trauma that sort of removed his cognitive processes, or was it the serum? There's a little bit of indeterminacy in it, which I think is good. That's why I like this movie. I think that it's out there, but it doesn't have to answer the questions.
Well, that's assumingly why we see the scientific process behind it and why it's still being tested, is because when it is used, it's making these people, or in the case of the cat, kind of murderous and primal in that they're not able to communicate like us living people are, just completely unprovoked. They'll start attacking whoever they see. And what was interesting about all the undead in the end, with Hill bringing them back, is that they weren't attacking each other. They were just attacking the living people in the room. So they were able to differentiate, but also not to control their urge to kill.
In that, I didn't really think of the scientific process, but you're kind of right. If you look at the scope of the film as we see it, the serum, the reagent, sort of improves with each iteration. The first one killed the test subject. Second one made them crazy. Third one worked on an actual human instead of a cat, still made them crazy. Fourth one didn't make them murderous, but
he was already murderous.
Well, no, I'm talking about Halsey. Halsey didn't try to murder anybody.
He did. He tried to strangle Dan.
I think that was a reaction from coming back. But when he went to cower in the corner, he was fine. After the cowering in the corner, he didn't try to kill anybody.
I think that's because Megan showed up.
That's a good question, then. Okay, but for the purposes of this, he's a little less deranged than than the corpse that they reanimated.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Because then, once it did get to Hill, at that point, most perfected form, it brought back not only his semblance of life, but it also gave him some control of his general functionality. So then the question is, if Hill had used the serum in the form that it was used on him on the other corpses, would they have come back as thinking people? Because was the lobotomy the thing that caused them to show up how they did?
I don't think so. Well, I do we know that he lobotomized them? Because I didn't see anything, like there wasn't any hole in their head that with Halsey.
I thought it mentioned it, and everything that I've read about it says that he did, and that was how he. Like, I thought that was the point of him getting there and then doing all of those experiments. That was why he went to the morgue in the first place.
Well, yeah, I know, I get that. I just assumed that he was like, I'm going to create an army so that if these people try to stop me from molesting Megan, it's just like such a why is that his end game? There are just small things about this movie.
Well, I can tell you why it was probably his end game.
Because it's simple.
Because it's simple, but also I think that the people who were making it definitely wanted to have Megan be nude again. I think that they just wanted Barbara Crampton to be nude and they needed a reason to make that happen. But that's so 80s. It's like Chopping Mall. 4 of the characters in Chopping Mall were just supposed to be eye candy. And I think Barbara Crampton in this was just supposed to be eye candy.
I mean, yeah. Because like the one piece of like really meaningful dialogue that Shirley has is like this cheesy, poorly written love scene right before Halsey attacks Dan and takes her to Hill.
They don't make Megan a person. It's an issue with the film.
Yeah, it really is.
They don't give her a lot.
It's in that whole era of like really sexist kind of casting and writing for women.
Except Chopping Mall.
I mean, even Chopping Mall is kind of...
What? The final girl is the one that saves them all.
Yeah,
She's the shooter.
Saves them all. They're already dead.
It passes the Bechdel test.
Yeah, you're right. It's just that... I mean, if you're ever wondering if sexism is really a thing, the fact that the Bechdel test is even something that exists tells you all you need to know.
Yeah.
But it's still, like, it's not I'm not going to say that like the whole sexism of Barbara Crampton being just there for eye candy is the only reason I don't like this. It's kind of like the writing around that fact is just kind of like, people figure it out. It's just kind of shrugged off. So in some ways, like the foreshadowing, it's written very well. And then in other ways, it's kind of like they just had a half-baked idea and were like, we'll just infer this one thing and people won't second guess it. That's my problem with it. But I didn't have any problems with the soundtrack because it was great how many homages it made, like primarily Psycho. The theme from this movie is just ripped straight from the Psycho soundtrack. And
yeah.
They must have gotten the rights from Bernard Herrmann or something.
I don't think that they did.
Or maybe it falls under the 40% rule.
I think it's, it falls under the 40% rule because from what I was doing on researches, they said it was composed by Richard Band. It was noted for its similarities to the score for Psycho.
Similarity.
Yeah, it took 3.5 weeks to write, and Richard Band noted that the similarities were intentional, but that he, quote, used that as a base and modified the theme while keeping the Herrmann-esque feelings.
Okay. I guess it's not ripped straight from Psycho, but it's pretty darn close.
It's plagiarized.
See, the thing is, if they'd gotten the rights from it, then, okay, so now I have a bit of a problem with it, because it is truly plagiarized, and maybe the copyright law for music wasn't as stringent as it is now. This 40% rule that we're talking about is if you change 40% of a piece of music from its original, it is considered then a new original. So if I take like a piece by Bernard Herrmann, say the Psycho theme, and change 40% of it, I can then call it my own piece by a different name.
Yeah.
And the soundtrack does use so much, because there's even like the Psycho stabbing effect, the da 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 kind of thing going on when there are these tense moments, like when Dead Halsey, when he first is revived, he grabs Dan by the throat. It's even to that extent that they're pulling from Psycho, and I'm sure that it's out of love, because Psycho is such an iconic soundtrack. I could see why you would want to pull from that, but in such an obvious way.
You know what this film score has on Psycho, though?
A kick drum?
The kick drum, yeah. That being said, besides those, I think the incidental music of this soundtrack is very original. It's only those big thematic moments that are the same, but when it's doing the other underscore material, it is a lot more original. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Watch No Evil. This is Matt.
And this is Matt.
And remember, when choosing a body for reanimation, just think Burger King. Always fresh, never frozen.